with Warren Buffett. You may disagree with him. You don't humiliate him. You know, there's certain people in tech, in politics, that carry a lot of weight. Mayor Bloomberg in New York. You don't mess with him. You can disagree with him. Don't humiliate him. The sense was they humiliated Eli Manning. I mean, I think he's a shot fighter. And in the end, it brought everybody down. GM out, coach out, quarterback gone, gone, gone. Don't have a problem with it. I would love to see them have Nick Saban, Sam Darnold, and the best young GM in the NFL in 6 months. I'd go after Saban, I'd draft Sam Darnold, and I'd go after the best young GM in football. That's what I would do, whoever that is. It's time to flush it out, man. They haven't had great players for a long time. Ben McAdoo looked over his head. I don't know, Jerry Reese had him on the show a couple times at the other place, but he doesn't get it done in the draft. They had to go buy a defense. So in the end, it's New York City, baby. This is the bigs. We're not talking Jacksonville. Go get a top coach, go get a top young quarterback, and go find the best GM. The game day revenue with the Giants is magnificent. You got nothing but cash, legendary status. It's time to start over. Come on, the Yankees got rid of Joe Girardi. He's Joe Girardi. He's going to he took a young team to the American League Championship Series. And they weren't, he totally overachieved, and they ran him out of town. I mean, the Knicks run through coaches. St. John's runs through coaches. This is the way it works in the big city. And it was time, man. It was time. Ben McAdoo looked over his head from day one. I know they got to the playoffs last year, but he still looked over his head. And Jerry Reese has whiffed on about 10 of his last 20 draft picks. They had to go buy a defense. And Eli Manning in 2013 before OBJ was done. Toast, over. OBJ just put a Band-Aid on that. So the Giants are starting over. It's a blue blood franchise, and I'm okay with it. So that's what I do. It's exciting, actually. And for the record, you lost yesterday. You got the number 2 draft pick. Go out and get a young quarterback from the West Coast. All right, now let me shift gears. This is what I was going to lead with until the world imploded. Anybody watch, Russell Wilson last night? The Wizard, as I like to call him. Seattle didn't have Richard Sherman. That was the story before the game. Seattle doesn't have Cam Chancellor. Seattle doesn't have a running game. That was the big story before the game. Seattle's playing the NFL's best team. The only thing that's mattered in Seattle for 5 years is Russell Wilson playing. They can't win without this. They can't win without that. They can't win without Russell Wilson. Remember when I said Dak and Wentz when they were on the field together? You're like, oh, man, Wentz is way better than Dak. Well, last night, Wentz, who's really good, was on the field with Russell Wilson. And you know what I thought watching that game? Wentz is really, really good. Russell Wilson's a first-ballot Hall of Famer. There have been 4 great athletes who have played quarterback in this league. Randall Cunningham, Michael Vick, Steve Young, and Russell Wilson. Only one of them never gets the credit he deserves, and that's Russell Wilson. And I don't know why. Randall Cunningham, legend. Michael Vick, my friend, Michael Vick didn't win a ton of big football games. To this day, people credit him for changing the position. Steve Young's a Hall of Famer. Russell Wilson, for some reason, maybe it's because they play up in the geographically isolated Seattle area. Maybe it's because he's 5'11 and a half. He was on the field last night with Wentz. Wentz is a great young player. Wentz had 2 good drives. And Wentz has a better offensive line and a better running game and a better defense, frankly, right now. They both have pretty okay wide receiving cores. But and I like Pete Carroll. But for years and years, Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and KJ Wright, and there's some egos, and these guys are the reason, and they're this and that, and then they get worse, then they get hurt, then they peel off, then they leave, and here's Seattle again. Here's Seattle one more time, because Pete Carroll is a defensive coach, and because he's a defensive coach, he likes to empower defensive players, right? That's the legacy of Pete Carroll, is defense. So he always kind of leans a little bit defense. He lets his offensive line go to poop. He doesn't let his defensive line go to poop. He empowers defensive players. Russell Wilson's been fighting with his own teammates for years. You read that ESPN article taking shots at him? Nobody's taking shots at an article on Richard Sherman or Michael Bennett. Pete Carroll, who I like a lot, with the Seattle Seahawks, was 14-18 before Russell Wilson arrived. He's now 64, 27-1, 2 Super Bowls, probably should have gone 2-0. He's 1-1. This has been my point all along. Why is Russell Wilson never given the credit for this organization? And my feeling is because Pete's a defensive guy. Pete's brand is defense. Pete empowers defense. We give credit Pete for defense. Sherman not there. Cam Chancellor not there. No running game there. Average offensive line there. And Russell Wilson puts on an absolute clinic. Can I just give you the sound up on one of those great plays last night by Russell Wilson?
2nd down and 10. Wilson again. Tight end.
Nobody gets deeper on bootlegs than does Russell Wilson. Vinny Curry is not used to seeing a quarterback that far down the field, and it is so tough on those pass rushers.
Kid's remarkable. In review, Ben McAdoo, Jerry Reese fired from the Giants. Russell Wilson is amazing. All right. I want to shift now to college football. You ever see the movie Tommy Boy? It's one of my favorite all-time comedies. I think my favorite all-time comedies, Hangover, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Tommy Boy. And there is a line in Tommy Boy, and a line all of us, I can speak for guys, have said at least once in our life, maybe 100 times. You remember the line, "That'll leave a mark." Remember that? That'll leave a mark. Something so catastrophic, so dumb, you'll never forget it. When Ohio State lost by 30 to Iowa, that is a that'll leave a mark moment. That's too catastrophic. You ever been hanging around buddies in college? You're sitting around, maybe you're having a beer. You're like, yeah, dude, I smoked some pot in college. Dude, I got so wasted one time. And you go around a circle, and then one guy says, yeah, I was addicted to black tar heroin. And you're like, that'll leave a mark. He'll no longer sort of be part of the group. You can't lose by 30 to Iowa. Okay, you just can't. I don't care about your strength of schedule. Alabama's not losing by 30 to Iowa. And I'm so tired of hearing this thing. Colin, winning your conference championship must mean nothing. No, it just doesn't mean everything. Let's do a little math here. In the 4th year of the committee, we've had 4 teams a year. So of the 16 total teams that have ever made this, 14 of 16 have won their conference. 87.5%. Winning your conference is a really huge determining factor. It is something big. It is not everything, nor should it be. If Michigan and Ohio State, remember, the conferences aren't all even, and the divisions within the conferences aren't all even. Alabama should get in. They would be favored over every other team in this playoff. And for the record, if you're asking me who's going to win today, I'd favor Alabama. Stop with the false narratives. Conference championships don't mean anything. 87.5%. They do. They just don't mean everything. And I love referencing Tommy Boy anytime I can. But there are just moments in life that'll leave a mark. The stain is simply too big. Think about this, folks. Of all the 16 teams that have gotten into this playoff, the worst loss by any team to ever even get into the Final Four was 14 points. Ohio State lost twice this year by over 20. And one of them, they lost, didn't they get crushed by Oklahoma? They lost by 15. So, my bad. They lost by 15 to Oklahoma. That's the worst loss for any team to get in. And then they lost by 30 to Iowa. That'll leave a mark.
That's going to leave a mark.
Come on. So, in review, Ben McAdoo got fired. So did Jerry Reese.